Everybody, this is your host, Rob Keynes with the Freedom Report. It is November 27th, 2024, the day before Thanksgiving. I wanted to do a video for you guys before Thanksgiving, and we'll get back to regular schedule next week. I've been traveling quite a bit and doing a lot of background work the last couple of weeks, which is why you haven't seen a video. I was active on X for those of you that follow me there, but on YouTube, I hadn't really done much. But there's a lot of things that we're doing in the background, which I'll talk about probably sometime into early next year as we get ready to release that. And we'll get more into that. But I wanted to do a quick video just to give you something for this week and let you know I hadn't disappeared. I'm still here. The channel's still alive. And then I'll try to get to what is some sort of normal or some semblance of a normal presentations next week. Any case, today I want to talk about something a little bit different. I'm not going to do the gold, silver economic thing. I'm going to talk about something different that I first talked about last year, but didn't put into video form. We'll get back to the precious metals next week. I have been following precious metals on X, so I did a little bit of it at technical analysis yesterday, and I've been making commentary. So you can go over there and get it on our channel, also called the Freedom Report, for those that haven't been over to our X channel. Today, I want to talk about a little bit something different. I'm going to talk about my experience in college 10 years ago in 2014. It was August of 2014 in which I had this experience, which I went to graduation ceremonies and residency week at Norwich University for my master's in information assurance, which basically is another term for cybersecurity. That's what my master's is in. So I was at the Norwich campus in Vermont, and as part of the graduation week, you spend a lot of time with your friends, you know, your classmates. You get to meet them because it was a cohort remote program, so you get to meet them on campus for the first time, people that you've been talking with for, in my case, over 18 months to finish that degree. And it's a private military college. I was one of two civilians that was in the information assurance program for that class. The rest of the people were either government workers or military, Navy, Army, that type of thing. I got to meet them for the first time, got to talk to them, and got to go. I had to do a thesis and defend it in front of my classmates and professors to get the degree, got inducted into Honor Society. And then we had the opportunity to go to some classes that they were giving throughout the different colleges. There was like the nursing college, you know, the business college, the tech college, and I chose to go to the military college because I knew a little bit about or been exposed to some of the other areas, but I really wanted to get some knowledge on the history of the military. And I went to a couple of cool sessions. I went to one on the use of proxy wars. And this one really was looking back at proxy wars we had used, like using Native Americans in proxy and how other countries did that to help fight wars like the Revolution, the War of 1812, those types of things. But in addition, I went to the session that was in the chapel on campus, and they were talking about sort of the state of the union, where we're going with regards to global conflict. And I just want to read to you what I wrote last year. I put this out on a blog last year, but I didn't do a video because I kind of didn't feel it was time. We had at that point just started on the whole Russia-Ukraine stuff. And I think we had just started on the Gaza Strip maybe at that point in time. And I just didn't feel like it was ready to kind of relate this experience on video format. But now that we've advanced another year and we're starting to see what's going on with the world and the global conflict, I think now this makes a whole lot more sense. So I'm going to talk about my experience there, the prophecy that was given to me that appears to be coming true as we move along through these global conflicts. And then I'm going to talk to you about why this is important, why I'm putting this out now. So I think you guys might find this somewhat interesting. So let's dive right into it. The title of the blog post was, "Is it time for World War again?" And again, remember, this was printed October 10th, 2023 originally, and I'm just going to read through it. And as I wrote, it says, "As I write this on the afternoon of October 10th, 2023, the news is a buzz of the conflict going on in the Gaza Strip. On October 7th, American media is reporting that Hamas gunned down Israelis celebrating the 7-day Jewish festival of Sukkot. In addition, thousands of rockets were reported to have been launched at a multitude of targets inside Israel. Hamas claims to have launched over 5,000 per reports from ABC News. The initial attack saw some 260 Israeli deaths, and current deceased totals are murky, but stand somewhere between 900 with an additional 2,500 injured. Hamas is reported to have lost 1,500 people in battles on the border with Israeli forces, though the total losses on that side as of now, are unknown. Israel has been also firing rockets at certain targets in Gaza, followed by attacks with Israeli jets. And note that this is a year ago, so this is before the whole invasion of Gaza Strip and then the blow up of the war going on in the Middle East, the various conflicts. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and continue with this article I wrote last year. The news is reporting that between 9 and 11 Americans have been killed altogether, though experience tells me to be cautious on reporting totals in early stages of conflict. That would be prescient because they would go up. The numbers always seem to be revised upwards later as more reports come in and are vetted to the media. Mohammed Deif, commander-in-chief of Hamas military arm 𝙁𝙍𝙀𝙀 brigades, said in a video that, quote, the Zionist colonial occupation occupied our Palestinian homeland and displaced our people, destroyed our towns and villages, committed hundreds of massacres against our people, killing children, women, and elderly people, and demolishing homes with their inhabitants inside in violation of all international norms, laws, and human rights conventions. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu proclaimed Israel at war, saying, quote, this is not a so-called military operation, nor another round of fighting, but war. His tone suggests a certain type of finality, indicating no diplomatic solutions would be laid on the table. It suggests to me a sort of final straw feeling that is making me very uneasy as I write this. This is escalating quickly, no joking intended. It seems as though old conflicts are turning into new ones and the world is careening towards war. I don't mean to be pessimistic or even fatalistic here. I'm just observing the general direction of things, starting with the Russia-Ukraine war that is based on a long history of cultural and regional conflict. And then we observe tensions rising in the Middle East again. Will either of these disputes ever truly be resolved? And by contemplating that, I'm not blaming these countries for moving us all closer to new hot wars. I think rather those conflicts are a symptom of the rot that seems to be pervading many countries. And that rot is a combination of economic plunder, forced ethnic and cultural assimilation, attacks on traditional values, upheaval in existing political systems, medical pandemics, and controversy over the origins as well as treatments, the rise in police surveillance and lawmaking to all go along with an alarming assault on personal freedoms. Does anyone feel more or less free than before? Do we feel more or less comfortable with where the world is headed? Conflict often leads to war. When leaders of countries cannot agree on basics like trade and allocation of commodities, it often leads to political conflicts. Then cultural ones. Economics, politics, and culture are all legs of the same stool. I don't typically talk about the latter two, as that's not the focus of my research, at least from a public perspective, though I have spent my fair share of time studying it as anyone in the last 15 years. The general outcome of simultaneous degradation of societal norms and laws, along with the economic rot pervading world economies, is that the next step is war. That is just history from what I found in my research. And it feels as though the world is heading for a massive uptick in conflict based upon all of these problems bursting at the seams at the same time. A prophetic experience. I haven't ever shared this publicly, but here goes. When I graduated from Norwich University in 2014, I had what was, for me, a rather shocking experience. Not completely unexpected now that I look back on it, but to be honest, I wasn't prepared for the frankness of what I encountered. In a nutshell, Norwich is a private military school that also accepts civilians like me. In fact, it is the oldest senior private military school in the US, formed in 1819 as a military and science academy. I was one of many in my graduating class, so only one of two that did not work for some form of government. The rest of my classmates were either serving in the military or working for one of the government's various three-letter agencies. So I stood out in the sense that my view of the world was that of a layman and not an experienced government or even military practitioner. I had less access to certain types of information that my classmates in their roles probably took for granted. My master's degree was in a form of computer science called information assurance, which is a formal name for what most people call cybersecurity or information security. The college, however, had several prominent schools, one of which was military studies, which makes sense. Anyway, when master's candidates graduated, we were required at the time, with the exception of those serving in far-flung parts of the world, to do a residency week on campus. You see, since most of us were professionals from around the world, we did the bulk of our coursework remotely online. This approach is very common nowadays for graduate degrees, as most colleges have some sort of online program. But back then, it was a bit more avant-garde. In any case, at residence, two main things happened. First, we were required to defend a thesis as the capstone of our studies. It was an oral defense and really more of a formal discussion and question and answer session with our classmates. and our professors in our own disciplines. It is simultaneously a confirmation of our mastery of the knowledge we had gained, as well as a bonding and a cultural experience with those we studied with, but had never met in person. The second is that a special set of lectures from each of the major colleges were held around campus that week, and we could attend any that we wanted regardless of our area of study. I chose to attend the military studies program, as that is the one that I had the least experience in. My bachelor's degree was a hybrid business and computer science degree, so I had very little in the way of military studies prior to attending Norwich. On a side note, our graduation speech was given by Condoleezza Rice, former National Security Advisor and Secretary of State, which was very interesting and impressive at the same time. Attending these lectures all week was quite informative and also normal until the last one, and that is the one I will focus on. I'll not provide names and dates, but I'm going to go over this in general detail because the participants don't matter as much as the content. And it's been 9 years, now 10, and I don't want to misattribute anything discussed to any particular person. The lecture was given in the White Memorial Chapel. The room was packed and even had plenty of people standing by the time it had started. We had an ambassador from a European country as a guest speaker, along with some higher-ups in the college attending as a panel. The subject focused on the State of the Union, so to speak, regarding the U.S. and its changing role in the world. It seemed pretty straightforward, but right away the tone of the discussion struck me funny. It was an incredibly somber sort of mood, and I remember thinking the speakers must have been discussing their topics ahead of time, and that the tone was set very early on in the public side of the discourse. I knew this was likely an extension of a much longer debate that had started previously that week amongst the panelists. Essentially, they were discussing the catalyst for the next major conflict or even more. And I mean of the worldwide variety. Now, being a military college, most of me think this is nothing out of the ordinary. But to me, it was quite forward. What struck me the most was the matter-of-factness of it all, as if the war itself was a foregone conclusion and the participants were just dickering over the details leading up to it. And to be clear, the term war was not being bandied about carelessly. The discussion was clearly about war, but the words used were, of course, a bit more diplomatic. But to anyone in attendance, it was clear we were talking about the next great global military conflict. There were no two ways about it. And that made the hairs on my neck stand up. I felt as though I was finally privy to some of the same information that my classmates had likely been discussing behind closed doors for quite some time. Intense. Now, this was 9 years ago, and at that time, I'd been studying the history of money and economics for well into 5 years on my own. In studying those topics, you also eventually make your way into contemporary politics, culture, and yes, even the study of conflict and war. But to have that sort of academic knowledge being openly discussed in front of you in a chapel at a military college with civilians and military personnel alike was quite a surreal experience for someone like me. Remember, I've never served in the armed forces, though my father, older brother, and some of my uncles did. The discussion was over what would start it. For example, would it be another European conflict, for which the ambassador and attendant sternly objected, being from Europe? Or would it be something else like a Middle East conflict? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it appears we have our pick from recent conflicts in Eastern Europe and the Gaza Strip. Prophetic? I think it was, and somehow I also knew that it would be at the time. That is why when Russia invaded Ukraine last year, I instantly had a very uneasy feeling, like a nagging sensation of a previous experience coming true, a weird sort of deja vu. I just felt as though we had moved out of the era of diplomacy and into the era of global conflict, as in burn the boats and no going back until it was all over but the crying. To state that at the time may have seemed overblown to many people, but not after the experience I had in college during graduation in 2014. In fact, as soon as it was announced Russia had invaded, I immediately began thinking about that discussion at Norwich. So much so that I've not been able to get it out of my head since. It has been a splinter of the mind, so to speak. You know, when you have a nearly 10-year warning on the next global conflict and it starts to happen much as it was projected, it's a very eerie sort of feeling. It's not like I can hop down to my local bar and talk to the guys watching football about it. And it's not exactly something you bring up at parties and social gatherings. I had nowhere to go with this feeling other than to contemplate the gravity of the brewing situation on my own. And I really haven't been normal in a social sense since the invasion started. I've just been off. But now as I sit here and watch the traditional hotspots of the world start to heat up, I can finally talk about it. I can talk about how I've been dealing with this knowledge for years, how it scared the absolute fucking shit out of me at the time and turned me into sort of a prepper. I mean the kind that invests in gold, pays off debt, buys some extra food, and spends a little bit of time at the gun range just in case. I even took classes in karate and Krav Maga and put my kids in them too, while proud of my son who would be testing for a second-degree black belt in Taekwondo this December. And as an update, since this year later, he did get his second degree and he's working on his third. He also earned a brown belt in karate. I never went that far, just took enough of the classes so I could defend myself. But out of all that preparation, both mentally and physically, it hasn't made it any easier this week on the news of a militant sect of Palestinians in Israel going to war. If anything, it makes it worse. Because you see, I don't see any resolution to the world's problem until it comes all crashing down. First, it will be the proxy wars and the hotbeds getting into it first. Heads of state in Europe, China, Russia, Middle East, Australia, and Japan have all been ramping up their military spending the last few years. Have you been paying attention to that? I have. Then it goes to an economic collapse in likely many corners of the world. That will exacerbate problems and lead to much larger conflicts and likely the spread of more hot wars. Whether we get to world war is anyone's guess, but as I type this, two current presidential candidates, Trump and Ramaswamy, have been discussing the likelihood of this conflict leading to World War III. And that is not a typo. They are openly discussing it on social media and in the news today. What I've been dreading all these years is not just a collapse of our currency. It is a collapse of our social order and the horrible consequences of that the world has not seen in several generations. Perhaps I'm more open to it, being that my father was in the Navy in World War II and landed on Normandy Beach and fought the Germans, for which our family, being originally from Germany and having emigrated to the United States in the mid-1800s. Or my mother, whom grew up on a farm in Texas during the Great Depression and used to always warn me to be frugal and to save money. Don't throw anything away that I didn't need to. Or my older brother's insistence that I keep the roll of silver dimes he gave me when I was like 7 years old, or my failure to grasp his warning and to do so. Or the real reason he taught me to shoot guns on his ranch when I visited during summers growing up. I don't know too many kids who started off firing 12-gauge shotguns or .357 Magnum revolvers when they were 7 years old, hunting deer and scavenging for crawfish, even if they do visit the countryside. Looking back, that's not terribly normal for most people. Or why my other brother from my dad's first marriage told me about the horrors of the Vietnam War and what it really was about that you're never going to hear reported in the news, and about his decades-long battle with complex PTSD that made his life very difficult, and his decision to serve as a physician assistant during his life after to help people, and I think subconsciously make up for the horrible things he was forced to do in the war in his early years as a man. All of these experiences from my life and the information I have been partial to at certain stages sure feel as though I had been prepared and not just preparing for what is to come the next few years. And it is the reason why I'm sharing this information with you, to help you prepare. Because the next few years, hell, the next decade, are going to be unlike anything most of us have witnessed in our lifetime, and for which the world is likely not to witness again for another 80 years, as the cycle tends to go. The wheel weaves as the wheel wills, for you Wheel of Time fans. This is not my normal blog, but I had to finally write it after all of these years. It was time. It doesn't help me that much, other than it allows me to finally get it off my chest and into the public, and to begin talking about an area of my life that has been so prominent in my journey into the public space and into my study of economics, politics, and culture. And so now you'll get a very different sort of experience from me, one that I hope ultimately helps you, and one that hopefully allows us all to talk about what many of us knew deep down has been coming for a very long time. Buckle up. It's going to be a bumpy ride from here on out. Winter is coming. Are you prepared? I felt like now was the best time to discuss that, given the escalation of the war and to talk about these very fast weapons that we have no defenses for. It's very clear that the nations around the world are coalescing around these wars and that they're bringing out the heavy guns. It's very clear that the world we're going to be living in going forward is not the world that we were living in coming from for the last 80 years since the last World War. It's very clear that things have escalated to a new level, not only from a secular perspective, but also from a spiritual perspective. And it's led me back to Christ the Lord and my study of the Bible. For those of you who aren't studying that, that's perfectly okay. There's no judgment here, but it may be something that you want to look into, because I think as you do, you may realize that these types of things have a spiritual element. We don't just get here by our own accord. There is another war being fought on a different level, and we're simply a part of that. Whether or not this leads to the great global conflict, which leads to what many people think will be the prophecies within a lot of these religious texts, I don't know. I'm not God. I can't tell you those things. What I can tell you, though, is that the path that we're on doesn't look like it has an easy resolution. Economically, things have to crash. That's just the way it is. We don't know the dates, but we know that's been the history of it. Politically, we can see, because it's downstream for culture, that it's broken, because our culture has been broken for a very long time. And when I was doing the research on Sir John Glubb and his study of all the nation states dating back to the ancient Assyrians, a couple of things really stood out to me. One was that conflict would increase as the dominant nation state aged. Well, the dominant nation state, the United States, has aged, and it's at the end of its 250-year cycle. That's a signal. Also, the lack of religion, the changes in culture, the rampant feminism and attacks on men. All of these things have been parts of these 250-year cycles that have happened to every nation state that predominated the world, and certainly the United States is in that position. Is the United States Mystery Babylon? I don't know from a religious perspective. I do know that the United States sits on the precipice of that turning point in the nation state cycle that every other dominant nation state, including Britain, Spain, Rome, Greece, ancient Assyria, and all the ones in between, have been sitting on in 250-year cycles. And I do know that this is not going to be resolved purely by diplomacy, which is why I've said many times, even though the Republicans got Trump elected and they think there's going to be changes, there's only so much that one man and even Congress can do. This is much bigger than one election. It's much bigger than one economy. It's much bigger than one country. This is something that involves the entire world. And as I sit here on the eve of Thanksgiving, I can't help but ponder how many of these Thanksgivings and Christmases we're going to have left before the world takes a very unfortunate and very dark turn. And I can only remember back to the stories that were told about my father and the stories of World War II and all the struggles that the silent generation had to deal with and had to come through so that we could have our big boom here in the United States. It may be time for winter to come again. It may be that fourth stage of the conjunctive cycle, or the fourth turning that's talked about by Neil Howe in his book. And it may be time for us to enter that era of global conflict again. I certainly hope that that doesn't happen, but all signs are sort of pointing that direction. And when you get the confirmation that I do, matter-of-factly, in a preeminent military college in the United States, by diplomats and people that study this for a living and deal with this for a living, 10 years prior, that this is right around the corner. And when classmates of yours that are in the Navy and the Army sit down next to you at your graduation week and tell you to prepare for war to your face because they know it's coming. Not that eventually we'll get there, but when in a time frame that matched about where we are, that this was coming, that's a very sobering sort of experience. And if anybody really wants to know why I've been writing all these years, and why I did social media, even though I'm not a social media person, I'm not your typical influencer. I think anybody who watches me knows that. This is not something that comes natural to me. This is not something where I want to become the next, million follower YouTube channel. It's never been my goal here. It's never been my goal. Sometimes to prepare for this, it takes a lot of effort for me to come on screen. And it's not just the research, it's the mental preparation to do this. It's the mental preparation of being out in public at conferences, to put my personal life on screen, to talk about the things that have affected me and to talk about the things that affect all of us, when I could just as easily go into the background and have the same normal life that you guys do. This is the event that told me that I needed to continue to talk, because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't come out and do the things that I do. Many of you may have noticed that I've demonetized my channel fully. I have no channel sponsors right now. I'm not even turning on commercials. It's not about the money. At one point in time, the money was there to help me, and the money helped me in the transition I needed to, away from my corporate role and into a more entrepreneurial role, doing some of the things I'm doing and some of the things I'll be announcing next year, which I think you guys will find exciting. It was there for a reason, but in the long term, it was never about the money. And I realized I had to make a change. I had to make a change to the channel. I had to make a change to what I'm doing, because inside in myself, I was being changed. I was being remolded. And I think this is something that I've been asked to do. And so I do it, and I trudge on, and I do it, and I trudge on, and I do it. And I do get joy from it, but know that it's not the easiest thing to do in the world. But I do it because I have the knowledge. I was given that knowledge, and I wanted to help as many people as I could. And as we sit again on the eve of Thanksgiving, I want to thank God, and I want to thank all of you and all of my family and friends for everything that I've been given in this life. I've lived a gloriously beautiful life. If the tragic event happens that I die tomorrow, I will go to heaven and meet my God, and I will tell him, thank you for everything. I don't certainly expect that to happen, but I'm very grateful in this time of year. But more than that, I want to express to you that the world changes, and sometimes it's better to understand and accept that change, and to understand that things don't always stay the same. But if you are a believer in good outcomes, which if you study the Bible, you will be, you understand what that outcome is. But even if you're just a general believer in the good of man, the good of society, you'll know that at the end of the day, things will be okay. But to get to the okay parts, to get to that growth, to get to that heaven, okay, we have to go through the tribulations. We have to go through those stages, and just be prepared for that. The reason I renamed my channel The Freedom Report is because I knew eventually we would get into this type of discussion. We still do the gold, silver, and the economic stuff. That's why 99% of you guys come here. But beyond that, the preparation needs to extend beyond. And you've got your prepper type things like your food and your water and your housing, your networks and things like that. But in addition, there's spiritual preparation. I'm here to tell you, and I'm being asked to tell you through this outlet, that it's time for you to make preparations for your spiritual well-being, and to get right with your maker and your creator, and to get right with those of you, those people in your family and your friends that you need to. Now is the time to do it. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. I don't know exactly what the future is going to hold, but I know there's going to be great changes. And I know that we're sitting on the very eve of them. Does it happen in 2025? I don't know. What I said at the end of 2023 is volatility would go up in 2024. And I was speaking economically, culturally, and politically. I think we saw that very clearly. And we're seeing this ramp up in volatility before the big storm comes. Think of me as your weatherman. I'm telling you the hurricane is coming. Start boarding up your houses, making preparations. If the recent hurricanes, Helene and other recent events, serve as any warning, know that this is your warning, if you're watching this, to begin making the preparations that you need to make. Be thankful for what you have. Don't panic. Be at peace with it, but know that changes are coming. And know that we may be sitting on the eve of the next great global conflict, which may lead into what they want to happen, which are the central bank digital currencies and a new form of government that's been talked about many times. And if that is the case, the ultimate preparation for that is in getting your spirit right. And that is what I'm here to tell you to do today. God bless all of you. I love you so much. Have the best Thanksgiving you can possibly have with your families. And I'll see you guys again next week.